Welcome everybody. Thank you for taking the time to join the webinar today. This is the third one in our new series, our weekly series, which aims to provide a communication channel for African aviation industry and is a hotbed of discussion that I hope is going to provide a foundation for us to discover innovative and collaborative solutions and plot a way forwards for our industry, because obviously it's troubling times. Judging by the increasing numbers that we're seeing each week on the webinar and the repeat attendees, it seems to be having the desired effect. So thank you all for your support and coming back week after week. Of course, as we know, the COVID-19 situation is ever progressing across the world. And as always, the health of our populations, our loved ones, comes first. So please heed the advice of the World Health Organization and your respective governments when it comes to washing your hands and taking the necessary precautions. Last week, we delivered an overview of the state of the industry from an airline perspective. If you want to listen back to that or you want to watch that, it's available on the AviaDev YouTube channel. It's also available as a podcast as well. Before we start this week's webinar, those of you who don't know me, don't know AviaDev, I just wanted to obviously take a couple of minutes just to introduce myself. I'm John Howell. I'm the CEO and founder of AviaDev Africa. We're an event dedicated to improving air connectivity to, from, and within the African continent. The 2020 event was due to take place in Madagascar in May, but unfortunately, due to the ongoing events, has been postponed to the 28th to 30th of September, still taking place in Antananarivo. I'm also the host of the only podcast dedicated to African aviation, AviaDev Insight Africa. Most of our panelists and a lot of our guests, a lot of our attendees have been guests on that podcast. If you would like to, feel free to reach out and we can do an interview. And before we start, I just wanted to go through some of the housekeeping for those of you who haven't been in a webinar before, if it's your first experience. So the format is a panel format today. We won't be having any presentations. Only our panelists will have the ability to use their microphones. Should you want to pose a question at any time, click on the Q&A button. We'll try to get to all your questions today, so don't be shy, put them in there. If you want to say hello to an individual or to the rest of the attendees, you can use the chat functionality that you'll see on your laptop or your phone. After the webinar, we'll send a copy of the recording over to you, and we'll upload the webinar to YouTube as well. There are also going to be a couple of interactive polls that appear on your screen for you to vote on as we go. Please do take part in these, as we want to see how your opinions change as a result of the conversation. So I want to launch the first poll now, and I'm going to open this to the panelists as well. You should be able to see it now, so please vote. Does the current industry situation represent the best opportunity yet to launch the single African air transport market? I can see the results coming in, so I will give it another 30 seconds or so, and then I'll close and I'll share the results with you. But yeah, we will see how this goes. Okay, I'll give it. I've had about 50 votes now. Okay, I'm going to close the polling now, so last chance to vote. Okay, and I'm going to share the results, so you should all be able to see it on your screen. So 70% of people who responded said yes, 30% said no. So a bit of optimism there in terms of this being an opportunity, something to come out of the current woes and the current woeful situation that we find ourselves in. So what I would like to do now is to just set the scene with you as well. I want to show you something from last week's webinar, just a clip from our good friend Raphael Cucci. I just want to make sure actually that I have the sound. Here we go, just to make sure that I've got that correct.
We are seeing that there's a need for governments to support the airline industry now and in the near future. If airlines on the continent do not get government support sooner, then by the time we get over COVID-19 and get into a mode of recovery, global economic recovery, there probably would not be airlines to support the recovery process. And even if they were, the recovery process would be slower and would take a much longer time.
Okay, so some sobering thoughts there from Raphael.
We are seeing.
Let me just move on. Okay, from Raphael from IATA. They actually have a call about COVID today, so IATA weren't able to join. Fantastic, Tefera has joined us. Good to see you, Secretary General. So today, as I said, we're going to open this up into a panel discussion. We want to talk about what's happening at the top of the industry. What are the issues keeping everybody up at night? What are the priorities? And you know, what is the way forward as much as anything else? So each person that we've managed to gather today, and I'm really delighted that everybody said yes and has agreed to take part in the webinar, has incredible experience. I was actually adding it up, and between the four of them, I believe there's over 130 years of experience. I'm not going to say how that's divided, but each one obviously continues to be hugely influential as in the industry itself. So the first person I would like to hear from to sort of set the scene as much as anything else is to introduce Ato Girma. So Ato Girma is a familiar face and voice for many of you out there. He is obviously the event patron of AviaDev Africa, an advocate of improved fortunes for African aviation. Ato Girma has worked for Ethiopian Airlines for over 40 years and spent 7 years as the CEO. So Girma, I've just unmuted your microphone, and it would be fantastic for you to give us a little bit of an overview as to how you see the situation, or whether you've seen anything in your working life that is comparable to where we find ourselves today.
Thank you, John, for arranging this type of webinar. I believe it gives us an opportunity to exchange ideas, and at the same time, it will also help us to probably support the aviation industry in Africa. I have been in aviation for the last 55 years. And in the last 55 years, we have gone through a lot of difficulties, but I don't remember anything that compares with this. And I was not born in 1918. People tell me, and historians tell me, that that is the only disaster period that can compare with this. Nothing else can compare with this. So really, it is unprecedented, and it is not something that the world is prepared for. All the other type of vicious problems that we had in the last 10, 15 years are nothing compared with this. I have not seen anything that has paralyzed aviation like this. Not only aviation, the whole trade, the whole communication between people. You know, in January, the airline supplied 106 million seats as a capacity, and in 2 weeks it went down to 90, and this week it is going to go down to about 40, which means more than 60% of airline fleet are parked today. This is terrible. And probably, even though people were hoping that this will be a question of 2 to 3 weeks, now more people are predicting that it will be around for another 4 or 5 months. So if this continues for another 4 or 5 months, there will be a lot of casualties. The airline, airports, everybody will suffer. And international trade, as we know it, is going to suffer a lot. So it's really a disastrous period. Thank you.
Thank you, Ato Girma. Yeah, absolutely is, and somebody who's obviously representing a lot of those people, those entities that will be suffering currently, is of course the African Airlines, and that's why I'm delighted to say that Mr. Abderahmane Berthe is with us as well, who's the Secretary General of the African Airlines Association, or AFRA as it's commonly known to all of us. Obviously, prior to this, just to set the scene, Mr. Berthe was the CEO of Air Mali and Air Burkina, and he's got 30 years experience in the airline industry and 16 years as an airline CEO. So he knows what it's like to be in the hot seat. And I'd like to hear from you, Mr. Berthe, in terms of what's the sort of the environment like for your airlines. What are the things that they're saying? What are you trying to do to obviously help them through this difficult period?
Good afternoon from Nairobi, and thank you for having me, John. Thank you for organizing this webinar. Yesterday, the Secretary General of the United Nations Organization said the pandemic of COVID is the worst world crisis since the Second World War. This is, I think, true. And the situation today, as I said at Girma, 2/3 of the world airline fleet is grounded because of travel bans and border closures by government. Maybe there are still some domestic flights and some cargo flights operating. What will be the effect of the COVID on African airlines? The immediate effect is cash constraint with trickle-down impact on the workforce in airlines, and the risk of insolvency for most of the airlines, because as you know, the cash position of airlines are not very good, in fact. And the medium-term and long-term effects will depend on the length of the disruption. Obviously, we have a big economic recession ahead, and there are some questions, and so far we don't have answer to all those questions. How long it will take for customers to come back to business and tourism travels after the COVID? What will be the impact on fleet and network planning for airlines to align with new demand patterns after the COVID? And what will be the impact on new fleet deliveries and the relationship with lessors, MROs activities also? Today, every aviation leader has to ask himself some questions, but unfortunately, the COVID evolving day on day, it's not easy to have a final answer to those questions. How deep will be the disruption? How long could last this disruption? What will be the shape of the recovery? At AFRA, I would like to express my solidarity with African Airlines, which were already struggling with a lot of challenges even before the COVID. It is critical for the industry now to find ways of resilience to rebound after the pandemic. At AFRA, what we have done, since February, we have been communicating with our members about the evolving of the pandemic, and we made a call to governments on 18th of March to support their airlines in these difficult times. We have been present on media also to disseminate our appeal to governments, and AFRA will organize on 20th of April this month a webinar with all its members to prepare post-COVID-19 strategies. And I think there is a need for enhanced cooperation between African airlines and also to fast track the implementation of SATAM after the COVID-19. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Secretary General. I really appreciate that, setting the scene. There's a few things that we'll definitely come back to that I'm seeing are coming up in the questions as well. Notably came up last week as well, government support, but also obviously how much of that is going to be able to be provided while we're having these issues with also oil prices and things like that. There are some countries that are obviously very affected by that, by the drop in oil revenues as well, and then having the actual fiscal ability to support the airlines is going to be a challenge too. So we'll come back to that. I want to now introduce Mr. Tefera, Mekonnen Tefera, who's got almost 40 years experience, much of it gathered with the Ethiopian Civil Aviation Authority. He actually began as an air traffic controller and then later an air transport officer, and then became head of air transport before taking up the role as Secretary General at AFCAC, or the African Civil Aviation Commission. This is the executing agency of the Single African Air Transport Market, or SATAM. So welcome, Mr. Tefera, welcome, Secretary General, and please, it'd be great to get a bit of feedback from your side as to your activities, how you see this. And the first poll I asked today was, is now a good opportunity to actually push for the launch of SATAM?
Hello?
We can hear you. Yep.
Do you see me? Good morning to all. Good afternoon to some of you who are taking part in this meeting. I would like to extend my appreciation to the host, John. You are doing a good job to bring everyone together. My apologies for the delay. I have been handling 2 teleconferences, and I have to interrupt the one which I was working on. I fully agree on the situations which we are in. We have not been prepared to such a level. It's a challenge to the world, and more so to our continent. Most of to save lives arising from COVID-19. What we have been working so far is that we have been sharing the guidelines of ICAO on pandemic and that of the WHO specific to COVID-19. We are also getting information from Communicable Disease Center Africa, which is an agency of the African Union, and we're sharing to our member states on the mitigation measures. We have brought to the attention of our member states the current state letters of the International Civil Aviation Organization, particularly Annex 9 on facilitation, with more emphasis on the continuity of operation, particularly on cargo, humanitarian operation, as well as allowing international airports to serve as alternate for the seamless operation of humanitarian services. Presently, we are working with the industry group in Africa in collaboration with the African Union Commission on what should be done at government level for the revival of the industry in Africa. In this respect, facts, to get data on the level of the impact, the estimated level of impact on aviation and air transport in the continent. A lot of information are being provided thanks to the Secretary General of ICAO, where she has given positive response to our request to have an African-focused study on the economic impact of COVID. The one which was done has only focused on the Far East Asia and to some parts of Europe. We do have peculiar features. Our member states are at this moment focusing on crisis management, on saving life. At the same time, we need to work on how the industry will revive. As you mentioned early on, we have to also focus on keeping the momentum of the single African air transport market. It's time for member states to recognize how we should be interconnected in the continent. We need to embrace SATM and also assist African citizens to connect with each other in the aftermath of COVID-19. This is what I would like to say at this moment. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you for the opening salvo. And I'm seeing a lot of questions coming in, but before we get into the panel, one part of the industry that is obviously providing incredibly important connectivity at the moment and supplies, medical supplies and all sorts of supplies into the supply chain in Africa is of course cargo. And that's why I'm delighted as well to welcome our final panelist, who is Sanjeev Gardea, who launched Astral Aviation cargo carrier in the year 2000, and it's now the largest private cargo airline in East Africa. But he's also here as the vice chairman of the African Airlines Association Cargo Task Force, and also vice chairman at the International Air Cargo Association, or TIACA. So many hats, Sanjeev, but give us the view from the cargo perspective.
Thank you. Thank you so much, John, and good afternoon to everybody from a very sunny day in Kenya. I'm very happy to be a part of this webinar today and to share with you what is actually happening on the cargo side in Africa. And the first thing is that Astral Aviation this year celebrates its 20th anniversary. And you know, when I look back at the last 20 years, we've never seen a situation like what we're experiencing today. And it actually brings out a number of challenges, but also a number of opportunities. So to start off with, we've been operating a network of about 10 destinations within Africa. And we've also been operating into Europe. And we've actually had a total disruption in our entire scheduled network in the last 2 weeks. And we've actually had a combination of challenges which have actually taken place. So we've first of all seen a reduction in the shipments of flowers from Nairobi to Europe. And that has also led to an increase in vegetables because during the shutdown in Europe, people tend to consume more vegetables than to actually have the luxury of having fresh flowers. And the second thing that actually happened, which was very interesting, is that we started noticing that some of our loads from Europe to West Africa started going down. And that also created a lot of imbalances because we have 5 frequencies from Nairobi into Europe. And when you actually have a lot of cargo in one direction, and when you don't have so much cargo in the other direction, then it actually results in actually making some capacity adjustments. But also within Africa, we've actually also realized that a lot of African countries started adapting very different requirements for post-COVID flights. And this is something that is really worrying because one of the things we started noticing is that a lot of the crew were actually subjected to quarantine restrictions in some of the countries that we are flying to, which means that if the crew do not disembark from the aircraft, then they do not require to be quarantined. But in the event that the crew disembarked from the aircraft and did a night stop, then on return, they would actually be quarantined for 14 days. So these are some of the challenges which we started noticing in some of the countries like Somalia and Djibouti. They did a complete shutdown for cargo flights, which was very counterproductive because cargo is a very important part of the supply chain, especially during the COVID period. And when you shut down your country to cargo flights, it creates a lot of problems. And one of the other things that we also noticed, like in the case of South Africa, is that when you actually do a shutdown, it also disrupts the movement of customs officials and people who are going to the airport, who are performing very essential services in terms of cargo handling and customs clearance. So we started noticing that the turnarounds were taking longer and longer. And this also started creating a lot of problems when it came to planning. Now, whereas we have all these challenges which are taking place, we see a number of opportunities. And the first opportunity we realized is that there is an increase in demand for medical charters, because right now everybody is in a situation where they're importing face masks, they're importing test kits, and they're actually importing a lot of things which are not readily available. And this is creating a very high demand for flights. And the second thing is that the reduction in the fuel prices is also helping the aviation industry, especially the cargo industry, because one of our biggest cost factors is the cost of fuel. So the reduction in fuel prices does help. But what is also very interesting is that during this time, the biggest opportunity is for airlines to cooperate with each other. And I'd just like to give you an example between a cooperation that we actually have with DHL Aviation last week, where we had actually set up a new route, which is to actually fly from Nairobi to Johannesburg on behalf of DHL, because DHL wasn't able to cope with the increase in demand for cargo into Johannesburg. And what they decided to do was to actually bring their cargo into Nairobi and then to let Astral fly the cargo from Nairobi to Johannesburg. And if African airlines decide to cooperate with each other during these difficult times, we will be able to solve a lot of the problems that we're actually facing with accessibility and connectivity. So this is really what is really happening on the side of Astral Aviation, a company that I proudly founded 20 years ago. But I'd like to also mention that in addition to that, I'm also the vice chairman of TIACA, which is the largest air cargo association in the world. And I'm proud to be the only member from Africa to be a part of TIACA. And I'm also the vice chairman of AFRA's Cargo Task Force. And I just wanted to share with all of you what we are trying to do as an association, at least from TIACA's point of view. Is the first thing that we did was we recognized that we need to create an awareness within the TIACA members of what are the challenges that the industry is facing because of the COVID. But at the same time also to share experiences to the members of TIACA so that they're actually aware of what is going on. But I think the best thing that we actually did last week was that we became a member of the ICAO technical group on joint actions related to COVID-19. So this is an initiative of ICAO where they actually brought in WHO, IATA, ACI, and GEA, and TIACA is proud to become a part of the ICAO technical task force. And what we are really trying to do is to actually make sure that the air cargo industry, which plays a very important part during this crisis, will actually be heard by the regulators and the governments. So this is something that we are trying to do with as an air cargo association, and we are actually going to make sure that our voice is heard and that the industry is united during these difficult times.
Fantastic, thank you, Sanjeev. And yeah, cooperation, collaboration, it's at the heart of everything that we're pushing for very much. And I think there will be opportunities out of this. So I appreciate that kind of positive spin on it. Now, I want to come back to you, Girma, because there's been a couple of questions through the Q&A, and I'm sure our panelists can see them as well. But especially from Noel from ASCAI, David from down in Cape Town, Clive from Zambia / the UK. Their question is, what should support look like and where should it come from? So in terms of, you've got two things here. One is you have carriers in Africa that are some were successful before COVID, some were not. And where should the support go? Should it only go to those that were already showing signs of success or are successful? And should that money just come from governments, or should it come from other institutions like the African Development Bank or the African Union or wherever it may be. So there's a couple of points there. Should the airlines that weren't doing well pre-COVID continue to be supported?
I believe it is not time to discriminate airlines in Africa. I think we have a clear problem for everybody, and everybody suffers the same from the same problem. So I believe governments would have to support their carriers. Plus, the World Bank has earmarked some money, some good money, for to support African governments. And I hope when the African governments get this money, they would try to really give a fair share of that money to the airlines, because the industry that suffers most is the airline industry. Therefore, there must be support. And if the government tries to use most of that money for other industries, what will happen is maybe by the time we saw this problem is solved, there will be no airline to support the economic growth of African countries. So they will have to really look at it from that angle. And I should believe also it is not only meant for government airlines. It has to go also to the private airlines, because they all have to be supported. They all have to support the economic development of the continent in the years to come. So they should all be encouraged. I believe American government has earmarked $58 billion to support their passenger airline, and another $15 billion to support their cargo airline. Okay, African governments are not as rich, but I believe they should allocate some money to support their airlines. And also from the development aid that they get from African Development Bank, and I'm sure African Development Bank is already working on ways of availing some relief for African airlines. But the airlines also will have to work for themselves. They will have to talk to their lessors. They will have to talk to their financiers and try to reorganize their debt. If they don't do that now, probably by the time these organizations are overburdened by airlines from other countries, they may not have the ears to listen to us. So we have to start early and really demand from these lessors some sort of a relief. I believe there are also things that can be done by the airline. They will have to really embark on a cost-cutting measures. As you said, many of the airlines were already suffering even during normal times. During this abnormal time, they will have to find a way of saying, okay, if they have 20,000 employees, 15,000 employees, do they really require them? An airline is not an employment agency. So this is the time to really look at their own performance. And at the same time, if there are costs that they are incurring today, which they can stop the bleeding of the airline, I think they should do it. They should not just sit and wait for governments and financial institutions to come to their rescue. They should also do their own share. And I'm happy to see some of the airlines have taken drastic action, allowing people to go on, some even reducing they're giving up their salary for some time.
Oh, I think we've lost you, Girma. We'll come back to you shortly. Give me a couple of minutes, so I'm sure you'll sort out your technical issues. So Mr. Berthe's got his hand in the air, and I want to come to you now. We have had a question from Agnes, who's the CEO of Air Botswana. She's asked, is there direct specific communication with governments, or is it just a general plea made by AFRA for governments to support airlines? So if you could address that as well, Mr. Berthe, that would be great.
Yes, we have sent an appeal to all governments, to ministers of transport and Minister of Finance. We have offered AFRA assistance also, because we think that all airlines need assistance, even they are state-owned or private. And we think that there is no recipe which can work for all situations, because, you know, states are different, airlines have different structures also. Some have strong cash positions, others are weak cash positions also. And the government need to sit with the industry, not only airline, because we are talking about airlines, because how airlines can fly if other stakeholders like air navigation service providers, airports are not in a good situation. So I think in each country, governments need to sit with stakeholders and find the solutions which are workable for their country. And also something very important, airlines leaders need now not to wait the end of COVID-19, now to start thinking about how to rebound, how to prepare strategies for after COVID-19. This is very important. That is why we are organizing a webinar, as I said at my introduction, on 20th of April with our members. We will invite some experts to discuss on strategies after the COVID-19. I would like also to suggest, because I know that there were one meeting of the Ministerial Working Group of YD on end of April or beginning of May. I will suggest that this meeting should be maintained on the form of a webinar, not to wait after COVID, because I think it's also very important that all stakeholders, all experts can discuss, and also the minister to adopt some recommendations to the government. I know that aviation is not only the domain where assistance is needed now. Assistance is needed for health systems in Africa. Assistance is needed for small businesses also in Africa. My fear is that airlines, aviation will come last in this effort. As I said, Girma Wake, we need to know that aviation should be considered as part of the recovery plan for Africa. This is very, very important. The government need to put as a priority to assist airlines. If I can give an example, for example, in United States, the stimulus package, they have decided 2.5% of the stimulus package will go to aviation, but it will be enough to avoid bankruptcy of many airlines in the United States. So for me, the first assistance should come from governments or shareholders there are different forms of assistance. It's not only cash to put on airlines. The international fundings will be welcome also, but I'm afraid that this assistance from international organization will first go to other sectors than aviation. But we need to fight to advocate so that aviation should be taken also in consideration. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, we do need to fight for this, because I know this has been an issue for a long time in terms of when you look at how much is spent on road infrastructure versus airport infrastructure across the continent or across, across the world in some circumstances. But obviously, without aviation, I think governments are going to see the value of aviation, if that makes sense, because it's going to be an important part of the recovery for any country. It's going to require a strong aviation sector. And as Girma said, and as Raphael said last week, it's a lot harder to start with no airlines than it is to keep some of these going. So thank you for that, Secretary General. I really appreciate it. I want to come back to Secretary General of AFCAC now. He wants to make a couple of points as well. So over to you, Tefera.
Thank you. I think we have to take into consideration that the funds which are being considered by the World Bank and the African Development Bank will be targeting individual states.
Your connection isn't great. We'll give it a couple of seconds just to see whether it kicks back in.
Aviation states, so that aviation receive due recognition in the development of the recovery plan. The aviation industry should also receive, as a matter of priority, government guarantee for any loans or otherwise, so that the airlines will not go to bankruptcy. The situation of African Airlines has various modalities. Some of them are government-owned and some are private-owned. Some are startup airlines as well. Who will be affected the most? We have to substantiate it with data. But it is the responsibility of those who are involved in the recovery plan to take into all in their perspective. While we are focusing on airlines, we have to also give due consideration on the impact of COVID on airports, air navigation service providers, and the rest. We have to ensure the sustainable development of air transport. We have to address issues related to safety and security. The airports or the air navigation service providers may encounter challenges in securing foreign currency for spare parts. The list to mention, which will be critical to the sustainable development of air transport. Coming to how to keep the momentum of the SATM, which provoked a lot of questions to come forward, is that we have been working with the experts of the ministerial working group. Yes, we had a plan to conduct a meeting. What we are doing now is to have a continuous engagement with the experts of the ministerial working group. We're planning also to have regional economic communities meeting, which will take into account on their respective roles on the Saturn. We'll find means to have the e-meeting with them as well. A decision has been made to have a high-level meeting at the heads of state level, which are party to the Saturn. We'll also fast track on how to sensitize those who are part of the Saturn on how to keep the momentum and also consider aviation industry in the recovery plan. Yes, time is of essence. At the same time, we have to substantiate with data on the economic impact of COVID on the industry. At the same time, we have to also remain cognizant of the situation which is prevailing in the continent and what most health experts are predicting to happen in the coming week or two. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And yeah, very interesting points. I want to just quickly change the subject a little bit. I'm going to come to Sanjeev's in a very short while, but I just wanted to read out an intervention that we've had from my good friend Jamie, who's based there in Dubai from Collins Aerospace. He just wants to make sure that everybody knows, you know, these vendors, the suppliers to the airlines are in constant communication with their customers. I know this is the case for many of the OEMs, obviously the lessors and all of the suppliers, and they're looking at granting payment holidays, being very flexible. We're all in this together, I think, is basically the message, and it's a really tough time. So I know that everybody sort of looks at it this way, and that's definitely the way it should look. But I wanted to come to you, Sanjeev. There's a question that's come through with regards from Zelalem from, I believe, from Ethiopia. How do you see the strategic conversion of passenger fleets to cargo? Do you think this is sustainable? And to what extent, you know, can you see this taking place over and remaining in the industry?
Thank you. It's a very good question, and I've seen a lot of airlines who are now using passenger aircraft for carrying cargo. And I was just having an earlier discussion with Girma about Ethiopian Airlines, who are now flying passenger flights even as far as South America, and they're making a very big difference. Now, this is a temporary measure where I see a situation where certain airlines who have an excess amount of crew and passenger aircrafts, which are currently parked, who are taking the opportunity of moving cargo on the passenger aircrafts based on guidelines which has been given by Boeing and Airbus. And it's a very interesting way of how one can actually adapt during difficult times. And I must give a word of thanks to the passenger airlines who are actually using their passenger fleet to carry cargo, but this is really a short-term. This is really a short-term solution because the extent of cargo that is currently being moved by freighter aircrafts is quite high. But you still have certain regions where there is a bit of a capacity problem, which can be now served by using the passenger aircrafts. So I've noticed that a lot of airlines in the Middle East, in Europe, and also in the case of Ethiopian Airlines, who have actually started to use passenger.
I think we've lost you, Sanjeev. Let's hopefully get you back.
Back. Sorry about that.
There you go. I think we should be able to hear you now, Sanjeev.
Yes. So would you like me to repeat what I said, or did you hear everything that I did say?
No, please carry on. We didn't quite get all of it. So yeah, please just go back a little bit.
Okay, so I believe this is a short-term solution, but one which is very innovative. And I really believe that it's the right thing to step in and provide the capacity, especially at such a difficult time. And I think that at some point in time correct itself, and we believe that being very optimistic going forward, we believe that within the next 2 months, we understand that the situation should start getting back to normal and passenger flights will be resuming. And again, I'm being very optimistic. But having said that, I see that in the month of April, a lot of passenger flights will be used for carrying cargo. And I really think that this is absolutely fantastic. And this is something which should be welcomed and should be encouraged.
Fantastic. Thank you, Sanjeev. So I've had a really interesting question. I know we've only got 5 minutes or so, but I wanted to put this one to you, Secretary General of AFRA. Quite an interesting take from Ed Gardea. He said, do you think that this unique situation will actually create a complete paradigm shift in the supply chain? That actually the airline, because I've been to so many events where we talk about the airlines are the ones that don't make money, everybody else in the room does make money, for example. So, will the airports, the MROs, the manufacturers, the lessors, the fuel, the traffic control, would it now be a time to sort of balance the burden, balance the chain? It's quite an interesting question.
Thank you, John. You see, after 1/11, nothing was like before for passengers going through airports regarding security. I think that after COVID, nothing will be like before. Simple thing. Do you think that people will continue to shaking hands after COVID? I'm not sure. For airlines, nothing will be like before. I think that now airlines need to start thinking about their fleet planning, their network planning, but maybe we will have some shifts on fleets and network, which destination, how many frequencies to serve. Right now, there is uncertainty about the length of this disease. And I'm sorry to say that the length will be bigger for Africa because the disease started late in Africa. We know that measures in Africa cannot be efficient because of health systems, because also it's not possible in many countries to put lockdown. So the impact for Africa and African airlines will be bigger, I think. But we need now to think about new strategies for the future so that African airlines can continue to grow. Otherwise, the estimates of traffic growing, doubling every 15 years, this momentum will be at risk. So it's a matter of urgency for airlines, for the aviation stakeholders to find now solutions for resilience and recovery. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. Resilience and recovery absolutely is important. I want to come to each of you now for your closing remarks. Ato Girma, I wanted to come to you first just to get your feeling on what, I know we're not at the bottom, and the hardest part with this crisis is it's not a short, sharp shock. It's obviously ongoing on a daily basis. But what do you think the environment will look like at the end? Do you think there'll be a lot more consolidation and a lot fewer players in the market?
I believe the airline management today should not be paralyzed by the problems that we are having today. they should use this time to really sit and evaluate what they have been doing and strategize for the future. I believe Abderahmane touched on it, but has not fully covered it. The last few years, we always knew that everybody around the airport makes money except the airlines. It is time for the airlines to really sit and say, is it worth it for us to really just put extra flights, pay all the expenses, charge very low fare, and pay that to others and have nothing for the airline. That is why most of our African carriers are incurring loss. So it is time for them to really evaluate their performance. I believe, yes, we have a very difficult time. I don't think we'll overcome this in the next week or two. It will definitely take more than a month or two. I think this time should be used for airline management to analyze their strategy and come up with a fresh strategy that will make them profitable in the years to come. And at the same time, they should also have they should really work together. They should not be looking at one another as a competition all the time. I believe this is a time when they should really think of working together to make Africa's aviation a better industry. I don't think one successful airline is what we need in Africa. We need many successful airlines in Africa. And that can only be achieved if we work together. I think we have to learn from past mistakes and come up with a strategy that will support the industry as a whole rather than trying to run it our separate way. Thank you.
Thank you, Girma. Yeah, reset time, evaluate your performance. I think they always say in times like this, new businesses are created, new business models are created. It's a time for innovation, definitely. So I want to come to Secretary General of AFCAC now and just ask you for your closing remarks as well. And as we said, we ran a poll at the beginning to say, is now the right time for SATAM to actually be launched? So I'm going to relaunch that and see what everybody thinks again. So I've just relaunched the poll. You should see that if you can all make your vote. We had about 75% of people said yes in the first poll. So I just wanted to see whether your attitudes have changed over the last hour from conversation, and whether we've kind of said, hey, do you know what, this could be a time for a complete reset, reinvention, and potentially, obviously it's important to have competition in these markets as well, which is something that we're particularly concerned about. So, okay, I'm going to end the poll now because we have plenty of votes, and you'll see actually the number has increased. We now have 82% think that yes, this is the right time. So hopefully this will give you something positive to take away from the session, Mr. Tefera. So back to you. We can hear you.
Hello?
Hello, yeah, we've got you.
I don't have much to say as a conclusive remark. I will appeal to everyone who is taking part in this forum to join hands and also to consider seriously that we'll not be going to do business as usual. We have to optimize the available resources and also be vigilant on how to expedite interventions required for the survival recovery and sustainable development of air transport in the continent. I'm happy to observe the optimistic result which arose from the question on does the current industry situation will allow best opportunity yet for the single African air transport market. I'm happy to say that 82% of the participants have said yes. And thank you for those who voted for this optimism, which will encourage everyone who is participating to play a role by joining hands. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And yeah, hopefully there's something to be taken there. Mr. Berthe, I want to come to you before we finish. There's been a couple of questions that have come through, but I'd just like you to address, because I've been at a couple of the last AFRA events as well, whether there's been any progress, because we've talked about consolidation, alliances, cooperation. Has there been any progress with an African airline alliance at all? It'd be quite interesting to hear whether this is, again, a good time to start something like that.
Yes, for a long time, AFRA had been advocating for cooperation among African airlines. It's not an easy task, I have to confess here, because some are not willing. And even for SATAM, it's not easy, even if we all think that it's now time to push for SATAM at 82%. But still, we will have to fight for that. I want to remind all of us about that, because when it comes to implementation, you will still see some reservation for some reasons. To close this webinar, I want to say that every crisis should be seen as an opportunity for change and growth. Stakeholders, as we are, need now to strategize right now for the future of African aviation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And to close off, Sanjeev, I'd like to come to you, because the one thing I did want to point out is you're somebody who's been a huge advocate for, been really involved and brought the cargo conversation into the regular sort of commercial passenger operation events, including AviaDev, where you've taken part as well. So I'd like to get your closing thoughts as well, as somebody who's been actively involved over the last few years.
Thank you, John. And I believe we are going through a storm at the moment, and there's a lot of turbulence. And typically when you're in a situation like this, you have to reflect upon what you can actually be, what you have done in the past and what you need to do in the future to actually make sure that your business is sustainable and relevant. And I think we have to also be mindful of the fact that the environment around us is facing a lot of constraints. There's a lot of challenges with the governments. There's a lot of challenges with the supply chain. And I really believe that we have to make sure that the part that we play as a cargo industry remains relevant and also does not take advantage of the situation that we are in. So we have to be mindful of the fact that this is a passing cloud. We will overcome the turbulence that we are actually facing. And the only way we can actually overcome it is by cooperating, by collaborating, and by putting our heads together so that we can actually be able to withstand the storm that is ahead of us. And then when we come out of the storm, what are the lessons that we've actually learned during this pandemic crisis, and how can we adapt to future crises which will come our way so that we can be more resilient and we could be more strong, so that we can actually be able to play the part that we are actually playing as an industry, but at the same time also to make sure that the world that is relying on our aircrafts, on our pilots, continue to doing what they're really good at. And that is really what I really believe is my closing statement, is that we need to collaborate, we need to join hands, we need to make sure that we ride the storm together, because alone we will never be able to do it. We will have to be able to do it together.
Fantastic. Yeah, it's the old African proverb: if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. So you know, we love that one, and I think that's a great note to end it on. So thank you everybody for participating. Thank you to my panelists. It's been fantastic. As I say, this recording will go up onto YouTube. You'll all get a link so you can watch it back. We've had over 35 questions, which is an amazing number. I've tried to try and consolidate those and put those forward to the attendees. I'm sure we'll do this again before this is over. Some questions came in about airports, about other parts of the supply chain. So just to let you all know, next week's webinar, we are going to talk about how airports can diversify their revenues away from aeronautical towards non-aeronautical, because of course they are being massively impacted by this situation, as all of the suppliers and all of us in the whole industry are at the moment as well. So join us for that. That will be the same time, which is 12 p.m. UK time next week. And just to let you know as well, because of course aviation doesn't exist in a silo. On Friday, I'm actually working with my my good friends, my media partners, Voyage Afrique over in Accra, and we're hosting a webinar talking about the African tourism approach from this side as well. So we've got some great people involved in that. You're all very welcome to attend that. So thank you once again to all my panelists. Thank you for our wonderful audience for your interaction, your engagement as always. I hope this was of use and a good use of 1 hour. I hope that you feel this is an opportunity for us to come together as a community and put our arms around one another and discuss some ideas and advocate and lobby for the right way forward. So thank you all for joining us, and we will see you next week for the next webinar. Thank you.